Oh, we are back! Not just for the first time since August, but with the most revered, cherished list you can release in a calendar year. It is the top 10 TV shows of 2023. If you remember in about Q4 of last year, I was saying that these critics were kind of acting like Chicken Little in cult classic 2000s animated movie Chicken Little. They were saying the sky is falling, that 2022 was the definitive end to the peak TV era, and it was evident from the upcoming slate of shows that wasn't going to be the case, and sure enough, 2023 I think could be considered another year of peak TV. This was a pretty stellar year of television, even if it was marginally worse than last year. Where the critics did have a point though, was that with all the strikes this year, and the mergers, and the potential mergers of next year, and Hallmark shows on HBO and Hulu coming to an end, it is clear that the winds of change are blowing in Hollywood. Could it be the case that in 5 years we look back at 2023 and think, okay, this is when the good times ended? Perhaps, but I think you could have made the same case in 2013, 2014. The same signs were present then. The end of a Hallmark show like Breaking Bad, the emergence of Netflix as a key player in the industry. Things were getting shaken to their core in the TV industry, and you really could have thought that everything was going to go to shit. But what followed was a period of TV, in my opinion, even more special, even more prolific than the first golden age we saw from roughly 1999 to 2013, 2014. This is not even to mention the strikes of 2008. You could have thought TV was going to go to shit then, and then Mad Men and Breaking Bad both hit their stride. Network comedies went absolutely crazy with 30 Rock, Parks and Rec, Community as well. So, are there reasons to be concerned? Yes, but I honestly feel pretty confident about where TV is going in the next 5-year stretch. So yeah, that's my whole state of the TV industry in 2023, but without further ado, let's get to the list itself. Number 10 is Gen V. I have not watched Gen V. Now, you might be thinking, Nick, what's the end game here, right? Having a show that you haven't seen on your top 10 list, you're not really playing by the rules of the top 10, right? Well, I can assure you, loyal viewer, no one else is playing by those rules either. I am using this slot as a protest spot against all the practices with these horrible year-end lists. It happens every year with them moving back the release date. I have now seen best of the year list before Thanksgiving. That is not a best of the year list, that is a best of January through November list. It happened last year with White Lotus. This year, a show in my top 5 is not even in some top 50 list because they didn't just wait an extra 2 weeks to see what the show is doing this year. Then you have stuff outside of TV, like Rolling Stone calling SZA's SOS the best album of 2023. It was released December 6, 2022. I may be the only person in the world with this pet peeve, but there are a few things as annoying to me as looking at these lists in the middle of December and then not seeing something on there that I know is elite and having that sicking feeling that these critics are going to put something released in 2023 in a top 5 of the 2024 calendar year. So you know what? If they're not going to play by the rules, neither am I. So you're going to have to settle for just 9 shows this year. With most of the bitterness out of the way, let's talk about some good TV. Let's start with Silo. Like Severance last year, it's at the bottom of my official list. Sci-fi, dystopia, Apple TV, and like Severance, I think a tad overrated. But there's a reason why Silo has been so hyped this year. The opening episode alone, Freedom Day, is in my opinion a top 3 opener of the year, and considering the competition that Silo has faced, that's a pretty momentous achievement on its behalf. I love the way they use that couple, not as like a traditional opening to the series, but almost like a prologue. Nevertheless, they are the ideal introduction to both the mystery of the Silo and also the humanity that is being suppressed by the government, the bureaucracy that is running the whole thing. But to me, the reason why Silo is getting on top 10 lists this year is how good the ensemble is, how good the casting is here. You look at Silo's plot, and it's a government that may not have the best interests of its citizens in mind in a sci-fi setting. That has been done before. There are elements of Silo's plot that are quite redundant, but it succeeds because if you put this on a network, right, they would be able to have the stars come out to play. But the bit players you would kind of accept were going to break the immersion because there were going to be B-plus players in the mix that couldn't hang with the more experienced, the better actors. Here, every single bit player can hang with Rebecca Ferguson and not feel out of place. And to me, that represents the promise of streaming and why we all have these streaming services in the first place. Because they have somehow orchestrated talent in such a way so there is not a single weak link in the cast, and that alone makes Silo worth the watch. Number 8 is Scavenger's Reign, in my opinion, the actual best sci-fi show of the year. Now, the creators will say it's more of a nature show than a sci-fi show. I would kind of meet them in the middle and say that Scavenger's Reign is a horror show where nature is the main bad guy. This is far and away the most terrifying thing I've seen all year. The animals are scary, the environment's scary, the plants are scary. You never think that like the fauna would be the most terrifying part of the show, but guess again. Now, the fact that this show is so gruesome, bloody, disturbing, and weird can make it a laborious and taxing watch at times. That's why it's lower on this list. but at the same time, I can't say it's like an A24 weirdness where you have to feel as though you have to take a shower and call your parents and apologize for watching the thing in the first place afterwards. Like, there is sense to all of this violence and oddities. The thing is, you read about the show and you're like, okay, this is for that A24 letterbox devotee, Paste Magazine critic type crowd. It is obviously going to emphasize the imagery and the ideas of sci-fi over character. But that's simply not the case. The fact is, these creators care a lot about getting you invested in this emotional journey that each group of characters go on, and that to me is why I got across the finish line here. And that is not to say the show is not visually stunning or it doesn't emphasize imagery here, because it absolutely does. And what I really appreciate about Scavenger's Reign is how untethered it feels from any sci-fi project I have ever seen. Most of the times when it comes to sci-fi visually, you can trace it back to a couple key influences. 2001 camp, the Star Wars camp, the Alien camp, the Blade Runner camp. Here, this feels wholly original in its world design. And the other thing about the world design is that this could never work in live action. This has so much variation in the ecosystems, this has so much variation in the species that we see here, it would take an infinite amount of money in 50 years to get a sci-fi world like this made in live action. My point is that hearing that the show is gorgeous and that it's so different from anything they've ever seen before, that will get people to turn on the show, without doubt. They'll be intrigued for a couple episodes, but the reason why they'll finish it is because they're given easy access to the emotions of these characters as they go through the trials and tribulations of this planet. You really don't get this sense reading about the show, but this is science fiction that prioritizes character over everything else here. It's why the show has these really emotional, cathartic, and gut-wrenching moments to it, and it's why I am really looking forward to what Scavenger's Reign has to offer the next time it comes on air.
The work of a few straight white men just blows Beyoncé out of the water. Is that what you're saying? On camera?
Kunk on Earth. So, it's the hardest show to rank on this list because I watched so much of it in November and December of last year. I just went down the rabbit hole of Philomena Kunk videos. I thought this was such a brilliant comedic creation of a character, played perfectly by Diane Morgan. So when I watched the show in its entirety this year, yeah, it was a tainted experience because I watched so many of those clips 5 times over before. But the fact that I watched some of those clips 5 times over gives you a sense of how amusing I find this character to be. Diane Morgan is without doubt the most pivotal part of this entire equation, but I do want to shout out the design of the show. This could have easily been too heavily weighted to the historian side of it, but I think it strikes a really smart balance between having Kunk prank these historians, asking them really inane questions, and also having these separate segments where Diane Morgan can riff all by herself. And if you like this brand of humor, if you can appreciate the Monty Python sensibilities of the whole thing, this is going to be a dream for you, because in terms of like jokes per second, this feels as densely packed as something like Airplane, only over a 5-hour stretch.
Simone, thank you for coming. I'm so glad you're here.
During the year, usually I rehearse what I want to say about these entries because I really want to say specific things about each and every one, but for Mrs. Davis, that wasn't the case. I haven't thought about what I wanted to say about the show at all, but I have thought about the show. Why is this the case? Maybe it's because I don't want to tell you a lot about Mrs. Davis. I just want to say, hey, this is good, go check it out, because the joy of Mrs. Davis to me was seeing it one day on a Paste Magazine Top 5, then watching it, and then really feeling as though I was discovering a hidden gem in real time. You really can't predict what Mrs. Davis is going to offer you. You may get past the first episode and think, okay, yeah, the show's going to be goofy, but this is about religion and AI and society today, but that wasn't the case at all. To me, the real worth of Mrs. Davis is the intricate message it delivers on motherhood and self-worth. The show is not perfect. Episode 3 is a chore to get through. Episode 7 made me doubt the show was going to wrap up properly, but then 8 comes along and it is the most poetic and overall just the best episode that TV has offered us this year. And for all of the reasons I've mentioned thus far, Mrs. Davis is really deserving of a spot on this list. With Love and Death, I think critics looked at it and just scoffed at it, like, huh, another true crime story from HBO. Not today, corporate America. We want more nudity in The Curse and another unfunny season of Only Murders in the Building. Yes, there has been a lot of true crime shows in the past couple of years, but we shouldn't penalize certain shows because they belong to an oversaturated genre. The same could be said of The Dropout last year. With Love and Death, I don't know how you couldn't watch this show and kind of be in awe of the performances given by Elizabeth Olsen and Jesse Plemons. Love and Death was portrayed as almost like a commercial product from HBO in its advertising, and to me that's kind of funny because I don't think any show this year has been as thought-provoking to me as this one, and has got me thinking as much about the role and danger of TV. The show, to its great credit, is really good at making you understand the anguish of its main character, but you get to the end of it and you're like, did we just glorify the villain, the murderer, for 6 or 7 episodes while dishonoring the victim? You could really develop some moral scruples about the role of TV in society after watching the show, but I just found Love and Death to be so thought-provoking and so briskly paced at the same time that, yeah, it just had to be on my list of the best shows of this year.
Kind of funny looking.
Uh-huh. In what way?
Oh, just in a general kind of way.
Even after the first 2 episodes, I thought Fargo could absolutely be a dark horse contender for my personal show of the year. Now, with episodes like 3 and 6 bringing down the mean quality of the show overall, I couldn't quite put it any higher, but Hawley has done some extraordinary things over the course of the show's first 6 episodes. I can't wait to see how the season wraps up, and it's all the more impressive that with so many plates spinning at once, Fargo still manages to be, in my opinion, the most beautifully shot TV show or movie of the year. I adore how the show looks, but I'm more in awe of all the other things Fargo is getting so right this year. You look at the first 6 episodes, we are treated to 4 of the most elaborate fun set pieces you can find in any medium this year. We have 2 home invasions, a gas station shootout, and a rehab escape. The show is almost giving John Wick 4 and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning a run for their money in terms of providing the most enjoyable collection of set pieces of the year. And the show, on top of all of that, is also providing one of the darkest, most cynical viewpoints you can find on American society today in anything pop culture. The show can certainly be overwrought. I don't think it handles its politics as skillfully as the number 3 position on this list, which is a big reason why it's not going over that number 3 show. But I must admit that for as many conversations here where it really feels Hawley is going overboard with the messaging, there are just as many, maybe even more, where Noah is embedding this overtly political message into dialogue, but he's doing so in a non-intrusive and rather compelling way, which to me is super impressive. And you might be thinking, okay, with the politics and the set pieces and the painstakingly beautiful cinematography, the show has to falter somewhere, right? It's not as though they can have dialogue scenes just as good as the Coen Brothers movie. And then you have Jennifer Jason Leigh and John Hamm in a room together, and it's like Joel and Ethan are writing the script and directing the show all over again. It's kind of magical that the best part of the show, with all the things I just mentioned, it's still 2 people in a room talking together, the ebb and flow of their conversation and how gleefully dark it could be. And that's Fargo. That's what you would want out of a Fargo adaptation, and that's why it's so high on this list. This is a joy to watch.
Your numbers exploding, right? Like, literally unbelievable.
Seasons 2 and 3 of Succession, there was a lot of dark, mature material within those 19 episodes. There was a lot of tragedy in those 19 episodes, but they were all so fun to watch. I can't help but feel a little bit of the fun of watching Succession was lost this year. And I think it's largely owed to all of us caring so much about the dignity of the show that when there was an episode where something really improper we felt was going on, it was like getting stabbed in the heart. And that's the thing. I know about 8 people who were watching the show in the spring, and I haven't met a single one of them who didn't take umbrage with at least one episode. Some, like myself, really took issue with how they wrapped up the election storyline in episode 8. Others really didn't care for the final 2 episodes. Some thought that 5 and 7 were really middling episodes that were elevated by great final scenes. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is that every outlet in America right now is telling you that Succession is the unanimous show of the year. And as someone who thinks this is probably the greatest TV show of all time, I just wanted to raise some points as to why I personally don't feel that way. With that being said, I was watching a scene from episode 5 the other day, which is in my opinion one of the lesser episodes of the season, and Madsen's talking to the Roy kids, and he's telling them that he's trying to make them rich, and that there's no reason they shouldn't be in favor of this deal. And Kendall says in a reply that they're already rich. And that sounds like such an innocuous line of dialogue to an outsider, but if you know the show and the context of these characters, the context that they're placed in, and the way that the line is delivered by Jeremy Strong, like, it'll give you goosebumps every time you think about it. And that's why the show is so special. You will think about these lesser episodes that you kind of take more issue with, and still, if you were to compile a list of the 100 greatest dialogue scenes of all time, you could look at that and be like, yeah, I don't know how you keep it off the list. The season was less fun to watch, but the reason why I felt like some of us were borderline obsessed with the show in the spring is that it's hard to name a show that was ever as meticulously designed as Succession. The word choice in every single line of dialogue, the specificity of the delivery, it was present in every single scene and from every single character, large or small. Any medium of art, you're always looking for those rare brushes of perfection, and even with all of the shortcomings of season 4, Succession still managed to find an abnormal amount of brushes of perfection this season across these 10 episodes, and that's why it has to be a top 3 show of this year.
You fucking piece of shit!
Now we're going to talk about The Bear, which I'm always excited to do because I bought stock in that show early. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You can check the video from last year. I was there from the beginning. But I must say I was a little skeptical of the show this year because during the midway point of the season, I was looking at the episodes and I was like, all right, 5 was superfluous, 2 was really forgettable, 1 I think is the worst episode of the entire series, and it got really cute with the dialogue. I'm so glad that was an aberration and not the beginning of a trend. But as my mom and I were watching the show, we recognized that episodes 3 and 4 with Marcus and Sydney and their little solo adventures, like, there was still magic there. It was a different kind of magic than the one we saw last year with the show, But the show still had the ability to deliver really special episodes of television. It was just, could it deliver a truly masterful end of the season, second half of the season, to rebound from some of the faltering of the first half? And the answer to that question was a resounding yes. When you start seeing The Bear appear on top 25 TV shows of all time, you will look back at the second half of season 2 and realize this was the stretch that turned The Bear into a made man. The Bear solidified its place in TV history this year because it refused to be neatly boxed into one category. You thought this was the Ted's Kitchen TV show? We're really going to only offer 2 episodes that scratch the itch of season 1. But when we are scratching that itch, it's going to be just as good as the signature long take in episode 7. You thought this was a show that's going to live off the quality of the ensemble working together and the chemistry of all these actors. We're going to separate most of the characters for most of the season. But guess what? Those solo ventures they have, they're going to be spectacular episode of the year type television. The only thing The Bear is permanently committed to is greatness. I said last year in my review of season 1 that my favorite part about The Bear was that it had almost this fable-like quality to it. You could learn more lessons at the end of each episode because the characters apologized to each other. They seemed like decent people trying to do the right thing. And that might sound like a trite point to make, but when you look at the golden age of television, we've had none of that in dramas. I mean, it's horrible people going for each other's throats for the past 25 years or so. Sopranos, Succession, Veep, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Saul, Barry, Thrones, the list goes on and on. It's so hard to find dramas with people that aren't completely awful. Christopher Storer and company never forget it was a tragic event that set the entire series into motion. Yes, The Bear Season 2 has very uplifting moments to it, but it never shies away from the trauma these characters carry with them or the depressing elements of their lives. But instead of having all the characters be jackals going after the same thing, trying to sabotage each other, they're working as a team, and we are constantly reminded that they are fundamentally good human beings. And that's why The Bear endures. That's why it's so highly ranked on other people's lists. Because it is trying to appeal to what most people are. It's recognizing the profound pain that most people feel in their lives on a daily basis, but it's trying to give viewers hope in the form of these fables of episodes. And to me, that's pretty beautiful.
I'm still pretty much a dumbass, and I'm doing just fine.
Number 1 is Poker Face. Now, usually with the number 1 spot, for whatever reason on these lists, they're the least intriguing to talk about. But with Poker Face, there's something neat about this show, and that some of these shows, as I've mentioned, are already considered some of the best TV shows of all time. And then Poker Face comes around in its first season on Peacock of all streaming services and gets the number 1 spot. How did it do it? Well, by being unabashedly joyful for all 10 episodes. Hearing that leitmotif that comes on when Charlie appears for the first time in an episode, it was one of the highlights of that semester of college for me. And what's funny is I shouldn't have this faith in the show. It has no greatest hits collection to dial up. It has no crutch to rely on because it's a new villain or set of villains every single episode. So it's not like, oh, you pair Charlie with this character, we're going to have TV gold for an hour. You didn't have that. But the writing was just so cracked, you knew every single villain was going to be as compelling as the last. Poker Face is in fact Pulp Fiction, but that shouldn't be a knock against it because it's some of the most well-made, unpredictable, and downright delightful Pulp Fiction I've seen in my lifetime. When your worst episode is a 7 out of 10 finale that, yes, has mistakes, but has a perfect needle drop, a pretty dope twist, one of the best final shots of the year that has me really pumped for a second season, well, that's what gets you Show of the Year. I've kept you long enough, so thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of 2023. I hope you have a great 2024, and see you next time.